They say success is the best revenge, but sometimes revenge is a dish best served in front of the entire board of directors. Ethan thought he had it all: the corner office, the Italian suits, and the 23-year-old mistress he left his loyal wife for. He walked into the company gala, thinking he was the king of the world. But the moment the double doors swung open, his blood turned to ice. Because the woman walking in wasn't the broken housewife he abandoned. It was his ex-wife, dripping in diamonds, holding the arm of the city's most elusive billionaire. And she wasn't just there to attend. She was there to take everything he had built. This is the story of the night Ethan realized he made the biggest mistake of his life. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the penthouse suite at the Pierre Hotel told Ethan exactly what he wanted to hear. He was a winner. He adjusted his silk tie, the fabric cool against his fingertips. It was a Brioni, costing more than his father's first car. At 42, Ethan Miller was the youngest regional VP in the history of Sterling Vanguard, a global logistics conglomerate that practically owned the shipping lanes of the Atlantic. "Babe, does this slit look too high?" Ethan turned. Chloe was standing by the vanity, struggling with the clasp of a shimmering emerald dress that hugged every curve of her 24-year-old frame. She was beautiful, objectively. Blonde, taut, and undeniably youthful. She was the trophy he had awarded himself after his promotion 6 months ago. "It looks fine, Chloe," Ethan said, checking his vintage Patek Philippe watch. "Just hurry up. The CEO, Marcus Sterling, is flying in from London. If we aren't in the ballroom when he makes his toast, we might as well not go." "I'm trying," she whined, her voice pitching up in that way that used to be cute, but was slowly becoming like nails on a chalkboard. "But this clasp is impossible, and I still don't know which earrings to wear. The hoops or the drops?" Ethan sighed, a sharp exhale through his nose. He walked over, spun her around a little too roughly, and snapped the clasp shut. "The drops. The hoops make you look cheap. And tonight, you are not just Chloe, the fitness instructor. You are the partner of the future senior vice president. Don't embarrass me." Chloe flinched, her eyes widening. "You don't have to be a jerk, Ethan. I'm doing this for you. You're doing this because I pay for the apartment, the lease on the Range Rover, and that dress," he muttered, turning back to the mirror. As he looked at himself, a flash of memory intruded, uninvited and unwelcome. He saw her. Sophie, his ex-wife. They had been married for 12 years. Sophie had been there when Ethan was an intern fetching coffee. She was there when he was laid off in 2014, eating ramen noodles so he could buy a decent suit for interviews. She had worn the same winter coat for 5 years so they could save for a down payment. But as Ethan climbed the ladder, Sophie had stayed the same. She gained a little weight after their second miscarriage. She stopped wearing makeup. She preferred reading books on the couch to networking at cocktail bars. She was comfortable. And Ethan, now dining with venture capitalists and flying business class, decided he was allergic to comfortable. He remembered the day he left her. It was a Tuesday. He didn't yell. He just handed her the papers and said, "I've outgrown this, Sophie. I need someone who fits my future, not my past." She hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown a vase. She had just looked at him with eyes that seemed to age 1,000 years in a second, and whispered, "Be careful what you wish for, Ethan." That was 2 years ago. He hadn't seen her since. He sent the alimony checks to a P.O. box in upstate New York. He assumed she was living in some small cottage, knitting blankets and crying over old photo albums. "Ready?" Chloe asked, snapping him back to the present. She had put on the drop earrings. She looked stunning, in a vacant, magazine cover sort of way. "Let's go," Ethan said, grabbing his keycard. "Tonight is going to be the best night of my life." He was half right. The grand ballroom of the Pierre was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume, truffle oil, and ambition. This was the Sterling Vanguard annual gala, the single most important event on the corporate calendar. Ethan swept into the room with Chloe on his arm, immediately scanning the crowd for targets. "Wow," Chloe whispered, clutching his bicep. Is that the guy from Shark Tank?" "Keep your voice down," Ethan hissed, smiling tightly at a passing board member. "Act like you belong here." He navigated the room with the precision of a shark. He shook hands with the CFO, laughed too loudly at a joke made by the head of marketing, and deftly steered Chloe away from the open bar before she could order a brightly colored cocktail that screamed tourist. "Ethan, my boy!" Ethan beamed, turning to face a portly man with a cigar in his breast pocket. It was whimsical Jerry Taxman, the current senior VP, the man whose job Ethan was actively trying to steal. "Jerry, good to see you," Ethan said, shaking his hand firmly. "You remember Chloe?" Jerry's eyes dipped to Chloe's neckline for a lingering second before coming back up. "Ah, yes. The delightful Chloe. Much livelier than your previous accompaniment, I must say." Ethan's smile didn't falter. "We're all about looking forward, Jerry. Speaking of which, I saw the Q3 numbers for the Atlantic Division. Looks like my team is carrying the weight again." Jerry's jovial face hardened slightly. "Careful, Ethan. Hubris is a dangerous cologne to wear in a room this small. Marcus Sterling is here tonight to announce the new restructuring. Don't count your chickens." "I don't count chickens, Jerry. I count profits," Ethan quipped. Jerry chuckled, but it was a dry, hollow sound. "By the way, did you hear the rumor? Sterling is bringing on a new external investor. Someone with deep pockets to help us pivot into AI logistics. Rumor is, it's Julian Thorne." Ethan froze. Julian Thorne. The name was legendary. He was the billionaire founder of Nexus Dynamics, a tech mogul who made Elon Musk look loud and Jeff Bezos look poor. Thorne was a ghost. He rarely attended public events, and he was notoriously ruthless. If Thorne was investing, Sterling Vanguard was about to skyrocket. And if Ethan could be the one to shake his hand first, his promotion was guaranteed. "Julian Thorne is here?" Ethan asked, his heart hammering. "That's the rumor. But Thorne never comes alone, and he never comes quietly," Jerry said, drifting away toward the buffet. Ethan turned to Chloe, gripping her arm. "Did you hear that? If I meet Julian Thorne tonight, we are set for life. I need you to be perfect. Stand up straight. Smile. Don't speak unless spoken to." Chloe pulled her arm away, rubbing the spot where he'd grabbed her. "I'm not a dog, Ethan." "Then stop acting like a puppy that needs to be housebroken," he snapped. Suddenly the music changed. The live jazz band stopped playing their soft background tunes. A hush fell over the room. The chatter died down, replaced by the rustle of silk as 300 heads turned toward the massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase. Marcus Sterling, the CEO, walked to the microphone on the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice boomed, "it is my distinct honor to welcome our new strategic partner, a man who needs no introduction, but deserves one anyway. Please welcome the founder of Nexus Dynamics, Mr. Julian Thorne." The doors swung open. A man stepped out. He was tall, perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He radiated power. It wasn't the loud, desperate power Ethan tried to project. It was quiet, absolute gravity. But nobody was looking at Julian Thorne. They were looking at the woman on his arm. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that cascaded to the floor, shimmering as if it were made of the night sky itself. It was backless, revealing skin that looked like porcelain. Her hair, once usually tied in a messy bun, was now a sleek, dark waterfall down one shoulder. Around her neck sat a diamond necklace that Ethan recognized from a Sotheby's catalogue. It was worth more than his entire life's earnings. Ethan squinted. The woman looked familiar. The curve of the jaw, the way she held her head high, exposing that elegant neck. Then she turned slightly to acknowledge the applause, and her eyes swept the room. For a split second, they locked onto Ethan's. Her eyes were cold, sharp, knowing. Ethan felt the champagne glass slip from his fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silent room. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered, looking between Ethan and the woman on the stairs. "Ethan, isn't that—" Ethan couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. It was Sophie. But it wasn't the Sophie he had left. This wasn't the woman who clipped coupons and wore oversized sweaters. This was a queen returning to execute a traitor, and she was holding hands with the most powerful man in the room. The shattering of Ethan's champagne glass was a minor embarrassment, quickly swept away by a waiter, but the shattering of his ego was just beginning. As Julian Thorne and Sophie descended the staircase, the room seemed to tilt toward them. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Ethan stood frozen, his shoes sticky with spilled champagne, unable to look away. "Ethan," Chloe tugged at his sleeve, "why is your ex-wife with a billionaire? You told me she moved to a farm." "Shut up, Chloe," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. I don't know." He watched as Marcus Sterling, the CEO who barely gave Ethan the time of day, practically bowed to Sophie. Marcus took her hand and kissed it. "Sophie," Marcus said, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the room, "you look absolutely ravishing. The rumors didn't do you justice." Sophie smiled. It wasn't the shy, apologetic smile Ethan remembered. It was a weapon. "Thank you, Marcus. It's good to be back in the city. The country was restorative. But I missed the game." "The game?" Ethan thought. Since when did Sophie play the game? Julian Thorne placed a protective hand on the small of Sophie's back. "Shall we mingle, darling? I believe there are some people you're dying to see." "Oh, absolutely," Sophie said. Her gaze drifted across the room again, slicing through the crowd until it landed squarely on Ethan. She didn't look away. She whispered something to Julian. Julian looked at Ethan. His expression was unreadable, which made it terrifying. "They're coming over here," Chloe squeaked. "Ethan, they're coming here." "No, they're not. They're just—" They were. Julian and Sophie were cutting a direct path through the VPs and directors, heading straight for the spot where Ethan was standing in his champagne puddle. Ethan's mind raced. What do I do? Do I pretend I don't know her? No, that's impossible. Do I act happy for her? Do I introduce Chloe? God, no. "Hello, Ethan," a voice said. It was smooth, velvety, and terrifyingly familiar. Sophie stood 3 feet away. Up close, the transformation was even more jarring. Her skin glowed. She smelled of jasmine and money. There was a confidence in her posture that he had never seen before, or perhaps he had just never looked hard enough to notice. "Sophie," Ethan managed to choke out. He tried to put on his corporate mask, the one he used to bully suppliers. You look different." "And you look exactly the same," Sophie said, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. "Still wearing Brioni? I always told you the shoulders were too padded. It makes you look insecure." Chloe let out a small gasp. Ethan stiffened. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were in upstate?" "I was," Sophie said pleasantly. "I spent the last 2 years doing a lot of thinking, and a lot of working. You remember how I used to help you with your spreadsheets, back when you were a junior analyst? How I fixed your proposals before you submitted them?" Ethan felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. He had never told anyone that. He had claimed all that work as his own. I recall you proofreading a few things." "Proofreading," Sophie laughed. It was a dark, musical sound. She turned to Julian. "Julian, this is Ethan Miller, the man I was married to for 12 years. Ethan, this is Julian Thorne." Julian extended a hand. His grip was like iron. "Mr. Miller, Sophie has told me quite a lot about you." "Good things, I hope?" Ethan tried a joke. It landed flat. "Instructive things," Julian said enigmatically. He didn't let go of Ethan's hand immediately. "She told me about your ambition, your strategies." Sophie stepped closer to Chloe. Chloe shrank back, clearly intimidated by the older, far more elegant woman. "And you must be Chloe," Sophie said. She didn't sound angry. She sounded pitying. "You're very pretty. I hope you're reading the contracts he makes you sign. Ethan has a habit of changing the terms without notice." I, Chloe stammered. "Sophie," Ethan snapped, regaining a shred of his composure. "What are you doing here? Really? Did you latch on to Mr. Thorne to get back at me? Because if so, it's a little desperate, don't you think?" The circle of people around them went silent. Jerry Taxman was watching with his mouth open. Sophie didn't flinch. She just smiled, and for the first time, Ethan saw the trap snap shut. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly. "You think I'm here as Julian's +1? You think I'm just the girlfriend?" She reached into a clutch and pulled out a sleek, black business card. She tucked it into the breast pocket of Ethan's expensive suit. "I'm not his date, Ethan," she whispered, leaning in close so only he and Chloe could hear. "I'm his partner. I own 50% of the new venture capital firm that just bought the controlling stake in Sterling Vanguard, which means, as of 10 minutes ago, I'm your boss." The music in the ballroom swelled, a waltz, ironically cheerful given that Ethan felt like he was standing at his own funeral. The business card in his pocket felt heavy, like a piece of lead dragging down the fine silk of his suit jacket. Partner. Controlling stake. Boss. The words bounced around his skull, colliding with his ego and shattering it into panic. "Ethan!" Chloe's voice was high and thin. She was tugging at his sleeve again, her nails digging in. "Ethan! What did she mean? Is she lying? She has to be lying. Housewives don't buy companies." Ethan shook her off, harder this time. "Quiet, Chloe. I need to think." He looked around the room. The atmosphere had shifted. Before, he was just another executive in a room full of them. Now, he felt like a spotlight was burning a hole in his back. He saw heads leaning together. He saw Jerry Taxman whispering to the CFO, their eyes darting toward Ethan and then quickly away. They knew. Everyone knew. "I need a drink," Ethan muttered. He walked blindly toward the bar, leaving Chloe standing alone in the middle of the crowd. He ordered a double scotch, neat. His hands were shaking so badly some of the amber liquid sloshed over the rim onto his knuckles. He downed it in one burn. "Rough night, Miller?" Ethan spun around. It was Jerry Taxman. The jovial senior VP wasn't smiling anymore. He looked pale, sweating slightly despite the air conditioning. "Jerry," Ethan hissed, stepping closer. "Tell me it's a joke. Tell me Sophie is playing some sick game. There is no way, no way. She owns a stake in Sterling Vanguard. She coupons for paper towels, Jerry. She doesn't negotiate mergers." Jerry looked at Ethan with a mixture of pity and disgust. He took a sip of his martini. "You really didn't know? God, you are blind." "Didn't know what?" "Sophie didn't just leave 2 years ago, Ethan. When you kicked her out, she went to her brother's place. You remember her brother? David, the math nerd, the one who lives in a basement?" Ethan scoffed. "The math nerd, who is the lead algorithm architect for Nexus Dynamics," Jerry corrected him sharply. Sophie moved in with him. Apparently she needed a distraction from the divorce. So she started helping him with his work. Turns out, the woman you treated like a maid has a genius-level aptitude for logistical pattern recognition. She fixed a coding bottleneck in Julian Thorne's supply chain AI that saved his company $300 million in a single quarter. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "Thorne hired her on the spot," Jerry continued, lowering his voice. "She didn't just get a job, Ethan. She became his secret weapon. The Oracle, that's what they call her in Silicon Valley. She's been the brain behind Thorne's acquisitions for 18 months, and when the opportunity came to buy into Sterling Vanguard, well, she specifically requested this deal." Jerry patted Ethan on the shoulder. It felt like a priest consoling a condemned man. "She didn't come here to visit, son. She came here to clean house. And you? You're the dust." Ethan stumbled back. The room was spinning. He looked across the ballroom. Sophie was holding court. She was laughing at something Marcus Sterling said, her hand resting lightly on Julian's arm. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly untouchable. Anger, hot and irrational, surged through Ethan. This was his world. She was an interloper. She was the woman who used to ask him how to restart the router. She had no right. He marched across the floor. He ignored the glares of the board members. He ignored Chloe calling his name. He walked straight up to the VIP circle. "Sophie!" he barked. Conversation stopped. Julian Thorne turned slowly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Marcus Sterling looked appalled. "Ethan," Marcus warned, "this is not the time." "No, I think it is," Ethan said, his voice rising. He pointed a shaking finger at Sophie. "You think you can just walk in here and pretend to be some corporate genius? I know you, Sophie. I know who you really are. You're doing this to get back at me because I left you for someone younger and better." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the band seemed to quiet down. Sophie didn't look angry. She handed her champagne flute to Julian, who took it without breaking eye contact with Ethan. Sophie took a step forward. She was shorter than Ethan, but in that moment she loomed over him like a giant. "Someone better?" Sophie repeated, her voice calm, carrying effortlessly through the hush. She glanced at Chloe, who was cowering a few feet away, looking like she wanted to dissolve into the carpet. "Ethan," Sophie said, her tone conversational, "do you remember the Project Atlas proposal? The one that got you your first promotion to regional manager?" Ethan blinked, thrown off guard. Yes. What does that have to do with?" "You were stuck on the distribution model for 3 weeks, Sophie said. "You were going to pitch a hub-and-spoke model. I told you it was outdated. I sat up with you until 4 a.m., rewriting the entire proposal to focus on decentralized fulfillment centers. You presented it the next morning. You took the credit. You got the raise. You bought a boat." She took another step closer. "And the Q4 crisis of 2019, when you lost the manifesto for the medical supplies shipment? Who recovered the data from your corrupted hard drive while you were crying in the bathroom? Me." "Stop it," Ethan whispered. "You didn't leave me because you outgrew me, Ethan," Sophie said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only the circle could hear. You left me because you were terrified. You knew, deep down, that the only reason you were successful was that I was propping you up. You wanted a trophy wife like Chloe because she doesn't challenge you. She doesn't know that you're a fraud. I am not a fraud, Ethan yelled. Then why are you shaking? Sophie asked. Ethan looked down at his hands. They were trembling violently. Go home, Ethan, Sophie said, turning her back on him. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, because Monday morning, 8 a.m., we are having a board meeting. And I expect you to justify why you still deserve a desk in my building. Julian Thorne stepped forward, blocking Ethan's path to Sophie. I think you heard the lady, the billionaire said softly. Security will see you out. Two large men in black suits materialized from the crowd. They flanked Ethan. Sir, one of them said. This way. Ethan looked around. Hundreds of eyes were staring at him. Some were amused. Some were pitying. Most were indifferent. He looked for Chloe. She was gone. He saw the back of her emerald dress disappearing out the side exit, clutching her purse. She hadn't waited for him. She had seen the writing on the wall before he even read it. Ethan allowed himself to be escorted out of the ballroom, the laughter of the crowd resuming behind him like a wave crashing over his head. The weekend passed in a blur of alcohol and insomnia. Ethan sat in his penthouse, which he suddenly realized he might not be able to afford next month, staring at the skyline. Chloe hadn't come home. She sent a text on Sunday morning. I'm staying at my sister's. Don't call me. This is too much drama. He was alone. For the first time in his life. Truly alone. But Ethan Miller was a survivor, or so he told himself. By Monday morning, he had showered, shaved, and put on his power suit, a navy charcoal custom fit. He convinced himself that Sophie was bluffing. She couldn't fire him without cause. He was the top performer in the Atlantic region. The numbers didn't lie. If she tried to fire him for personal reasons, he would sue Sterling Vanguard for everything they were worth. He walked into the headquarters at 7:45 a.m. The atmosphere in the office was different. Usually the receptionist would greet him with a bright, "Good morning, Mr. Miller," and have his espresso ready. Today she kept her head down, typing furiously. "Morning, Jessica," Ethan said loudly. "Mr. Miller," she mumbled, not looking up. "They're waiting for you in Conference Room A." Conference Room A, the fishbowl, glass walls, no privacy. Ethan tightened his tie and marched down the hallway. He saw heads pop up from cubicles as he passed. The whispers followed him like a wake. He pushed open the heavy glass doors. The long mahogany table was full. The entire board of directors was there. Marcus Sterling sat at the far end. But he wasn't at the head of the table. Sophie was. She was wearing a sharp white blazer and black trousers, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She looked every inch the corporate executioner. To her right sat Julian Thorne, scrolling on a tablet. To her left was a stack of files, thick, color-coded files. "Sit down, Ethan," Sophie said. She didn't look up from the file she was reading. Ethan pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, the defendant's seat. "I assume this is about the restructuring," Ethan said, projecting a confidence he didn't feel. "I have my team's projections for Q1. We are up 12% on the—" "We aren't here to talk about projections, Ethan," Marcus Sterling interrupted, looking tired. "We are here to talk about irregularities." "Irregularities?" Ethan frowned. "My books are clean." "Your books are clean," Sophie said, finally looking up. Her eyes were piercing. "But your operations are creative." She slid a blue file down the long table. It spun perfectly, stopping right in front of him. "Open it," she commanded. Ethan opened the folder. It was a log of shipping manifests from the last 6 months. Highlighted in neon yellow were dozens of entries labeled Priority Expedite. "Explain the Priority Expedite surcharge," Sophie said. "It's standard," Ethan said, shrugging. "Clients pay extra for faster docking. It increases margin." "It increases your margin," Sophie corrected, "because you aren't booking these through the company system. You're using a third-party vendor called Miller Logistics Solutions to handle the expediting, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands." The room went dead silent. Ethan's mouth went dry. That is a consulting arm I set up to handle overflow. It's perfectly legal." "It's a conflict of interest," Julian Thorne spoke up, his voice low and bored. "And it's embezzlement. You're charging sterling clients a premium, routing the money to your shell company, paying the dock workers a bribe to skip the line, and pocketing the difference. You've skimmed nearly $400,000 in 8 months. "That's a lie." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "You can't prove that." Sophie smiled. It was the scariest thing he had ever seen. "Ethan," she said, "who do you think built the auditing algorithm that flagged these transactions?" Ethan froze. "I told you," Sophie said softly. "I'm good with patterns. I was looking at the Sterling data stream on Saturday night. It took me about 20 minutes to find your shell company. You used your mother's maiden name as the registered agent." "Sloppy." Ethan looked at Marcus. "Marcus, you can't believe this. She's my ex-wife. She's vindictive. She planted this." Marcus shook his head slowly. "The bank records match, Ethan. We verified it this morning. You've been stealing from us." "I made this company millions," Ethan shouted, standing up. "I am the reason the Atlantic Division exists. You owe me." "You made yourself millions," Sophie said, standing up as well. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. "And you did it on the backs of people you thought were too small to matter. Just like you did to me." She picked up a single piece of paper from the stack. "This is your termination letter," she said. "Effective immediately. For cause. Which means no severance, no stock options, and no reference." "You can't do this," Ethan gasped. "I have a non-compete. I know the trade secrets. If you fire me, I'll go to the competition. I'll go to FedEx. I'll go to Maersk." Julian Thorne laughed. It was a dry, sharp bark. "Mr. Miller," Julian said, "Sophie didn't just find the embezzlement. She also found the emails where you were trying to sell Sterling's client list to a competitor in China." Ethan's knees gave out. He sat back down heavily. He had sent those emails 3 weeks ago. He thought he had deleted them. "That's corporate espionage," Julian said. "We aren't just firing you, Ethan. We're pressing charges. The FBI is waiting in the lobby." Ethan looked at Sophie. He searched her face for a trace of the woman who used to make him chicken soup when he had the flu, the woman who had cried when he left her. "Sophie," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, I'm sorry, I screwed up, okay? I was an idiot. But prison? You can't let them send me to prison. We were married. We were family." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Her expression softened, but not with kindness, with closure. "We were family, Ethan," she said. "But you killed that family. You said you wanted a future that didn't include your past." "Well." She gestured to the glass doors where 2 federal agents were now visible, talking to the receptionist. "Here is your future. I hope it fits." "Get him out of here," Marcus Sterling said, turning his chair away. As the agents entered the room, handcuffs gleaming under the fluorescent lights, Ethan looked at Sophie one last time. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was already looking at the next file, talking to Julian about optimizing the supply chain for the European market. She had already moved on. The federal indictment landed with the force of a bomb, but the fallout was a slow, agonizing suffocation because of Ethan's high profile within the logistics industry and the sensational, almost cinematic nature of his ex-wife taking him down. The media latched onto the case like piranhas. The headlines were relentless and humiliating. From penthouse to prison, the fall of Ethan Miller. The X Factor, how one woman's brilliance exposed a corporate fraud. Sterling Vanguard executive indicted on 12 counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. Ethan's assets were frozen immediately. The penthouse suite at the Pierre, the symbol of his arrival into the elite, was the first casualty. The hotel management, wanting to avoid a PR nightmare, terminated his lease within 24 hours. His belongings, Italian suits, designer shoes, the imported humidor, were unceremoniously packed into cardboard boxes and left in the service lobby. The vintage Patek Philippe watch, his pride and joy, seized by federal marshals as evidence of assets purchased with illicit funds. But the isolation was worse than the poverty. Ethan sat in a holding cell, wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and sweat, waiting for his bail hearing. He used his one phone call to try and reach Chloe. It went straight to voicemail. Then, a disconnect tone. She had changed her number. The trial began 3 months later. It was a spectacle. Ethan sat at the defense table, looking gaunt. He wore a cheap, off-the-rack suit his public defender had scrounged up. It was a polyester blend that hung loosely on his frame, a stark contrast to the tailored Brioni he had worn the night of the gala. Chloe was the prosecution's star witness. When she walked into the courtroom, she didn't look like the glamorous trophy girl anymore. She wore a modest cardigan and little makeup. She refused to make eye contact with Ethan. "Ms. Davis," the prosecutor asked, pacing in front of the jury box. "Did Mr. Miller ever discuss the source of his additional income?" "He bragged about it," Chloe testified, her voice thin and trembling. "He told me that corporate budgets were just suggestions for people smart enough to work around them. He called it his stupidity tax on the company. He said only suckers play by the rules." "And did he ever mention his ex-wife, Sophie?" Chloe hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, frequently. He used to mock her. He called her dead weight. He told me he was glad he got rid of her before he made his real money, so she couldn't touch it." A ripple of disgust went through the courtroom. The jurors, ordinary people who likely clipped coupons and paid their taxes, looked at Ethan with open disdain. Ethan closed his eyes, wishing the floor would open up and swallow him whole. But the final nail in the coffin was Sophie herself. When she took the stand, the atmosphere in the room shifted. She didn't look like a vengeful ex-wife. She didn't look angry. She looked like a CIO. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She answered questions with the cold, mathematical precision of the algorithm architect she was. Mrs. Thorne Miller, Ethan's defense attorney, tried to corner her, hoping to paint her as a woman scorned. "Isn't it true that you orchestrated this entire investigation out of bitterness? That you used your new position at Sterling Vanguard specifically to target my client?" Sophie adjusted the microphone. She looked the lawyer in the eye, then drifted her gaze to Ethan. It wasn't a glare. It was a look of profound disappointment. "I didn't target Mr. Miller," she said calmly, her voice steady. "I targeted inefficiency in the Sterling Vanguard ledger. I look for patterns that indicate loss. Mr. Miller just happened to be the inefficiency." "But surely," the lawyer pressed, sweating slightly, "you felt some personal satisfaction? Seeing the man who left you facing prison?" The courtroom went silent. Sophie looked at Ethan. For a moment, her mask slipped, revealing the pain of the 12 years she had wasted on him. "I don't feel satisfaction," she said softly, I feel pity. Ethan had potential. He had drive, but he lacked character. In business, as in marriage, you can't build a long-term structure on a rotten foundation. It always collapses. I didn't push him, counselor. I just turned on the lights. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar crime, didn't hold back during sentencing. Mr. Miller, you represent the worst kind of corporate greed. You had everything, a high salary, a position of trust, a life of privilege, and you stole simply because you could. You betrayed your company, your colleagues, and the people closest to you. Sentence: 8 years in federal prison. As the gavel came down with a final, booming crack, Ethan looked back at the gallery. He hoped, irrationally, that someone would be there. Jerry Taxman? His old drinking buddies? Anyone? The benches were empty, except for one person in the very back row. Sophie. She watched as the marshals pulled Ethan's hands behind his back and clicked the cuffs into place. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just watched, bearing witness to the end of the man she used to love. As he was led away through the side door, she stood up, smoothed her blazer, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The alarm clock buzzed at 3:30 a.m., a harsh, metallic rattle that vibrated against the thin plywood of the bedside table. Ethan Miller groaned, rolling over on a mattress that sagged in the middle. The room was freezing. It was a studio apartment above a detached garage in weeping, industrial New Jersey, miles away from the glittering skyline of Manhattan. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and damp drywall. He sat up, rubbing his face. His hands, once manicured and soft from handling nothing heavier than a fountain pen, were now rough. Calluses thickened his palms, and dirt was permanently etched into the cuticles, no matter how hard he scrubbed. This was his life now. Ethan had been released on parole 6 months ago. He had served nearly 5 years of his 8-year sentence. He had lost the weight of the good life. The paunch from business dinners was gone, replaced by a gaunt, wiry frame forged by prison rations and anxiety. His hair, once perfectly styled with expensive gel, was thinning and grey at the temples. He stood up and walked to the small kitchenette. He poured instant coffee granules into a chipped mug and added hot water from the tap. He didn't own a coffee maker. He didn't own a microwave. He didn't own a television. He drank the bitter sludge black. He had a shift starting at 4:30 a.m. at the Redwood Distribution Center. It wasn't a management job. It wasn't even a desk job. Ethan Miller, the former regional VP of Sterling Vanguard, the man who used to scream at logistics coordinators for missing a deadline by 5 minutes, was now a level 1 loader. He spent 10 hours a day moving pallets of dog food and bulk paper towels from a conveyor belt onto a truck. His supervisor was a 22-year-old kid named Tyler, who chewed gum loudly and called him Old Man. Ethan finished his coffee and pulled on his work uniform, a neon yellow safety vest over a grey thermal shirt. He caught his reflection in the window. For a second, the ghost of his old self flickered there, the man in the Brioni suit, the man who thought he was a god because he had a corner office. That man was dead. He grabbed his keys and walked out into the cold rain. As he unlocked his rusted 2008 Honda Civic, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from LinkedIn. He hadn't deleted the app, a form of self-torture he couldn't quite give up. Trending news. Nexus Dynamics announces record-breaking Q4 profits following European merger. Ethan froze. His thumb hovered over the screen. He shouldn't look. He knew he shouldn't look. He tapped the notification. There she was. The photo was high resolution, taken at what looked like an economic summit in Davos or London. Sophie stood center stage. She looked breathtaking, not in the flashy, desperate way Chloe had been, but in a way that commanded absolute respect. She wore a cream-colored power suit, her hair cut in a sharp, chic bob. She was laughing at something the person next to her was saying. The person next to her was Julian Thorne. Ethan zoomed in on the photo. Julian's hand was resting on the small of Sophie's back. It was a gesture of intimacy, of partnership. They looked like a monolith, unbreakable, united, and obscenely successful. Ethan stared at the phone until the screen went dark, reflecting his own tired face back at him. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't anger. He had spent the first 2 years of prison being angry. Angry at Sophie, at the judge, at Chloe for testifying against him. But anger required energy, and prison had starved him of that. Now, looking at the woman he had discarded like an old coat, he felt something far worse. He felt the crushing weight of clarity. He had held a diamond in his hands for 12 years, and he had traded it for a handful of glitter. Ethan tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. He started the car, the engine sputtering before catching life. He had a truck to load. Across the river, the morning looked very different. The penthouse office of Nexus Dynamics was quiet, save for the soft hum of the HVAC system and the distant, muffled sound of the city waking up below. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the Hudson River and the New Jersey shoreline beyond. Sophie Thorne Miller sat at her desk, reviewing the final contracts for the Brussels acquisition. She signed her name with a flourish, Sophie Thorne, and capped her pen. She set the pen down and leaned back in her Herman Miller chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Her neck was stiff. She had been working since 5 a.m., driven by the same relentless work ethic that had once saved Ethan's career, but was now building her own empire. "You're doing it again," a voice said from the doorway. Sophie opened her eyes and smiled. Julian was standing there, holding 2 ceramic cups of matcha tea. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and jeans, his uniform for days when he didn't have to face the press. "Doing what?" Sophie asked, accepting the tea. "Thinking so loud I can hear it in the hallway," Julian teased. He walked around the desk and kissed the top of her head. "The deal is done, Sophie. You won. You can stop fighting now." "I'm not fighting," Sophie said, taking a sip of the warm, earthy tea. "I'm just processing. Processing the merger, or processing the letter that arrived this morning." Sophie stiffened slightly. Julian noticed everything. It was one of the things she loved about him, and one of the things that made him impossible to lie to. On the corner of her desk, buried under the stack of merger contracts, was a white envelope. It had no return address, just a postmark from New Jersey. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable. "You saw it," she stated. "My security team scans all mail, Sophie. They flagged it as coming from an inmate, or rather, a parolee. They asked if I wanted it destroyed." Julian leaned against the edge of her desk, crossing his arms. "I told them to leave it for you." Sophie looked at the envelope. For 5 years, she had trained herself not to think about Ethan. She had exorcised him from her life through success, through therapy, and through the genuine, healthy love she had found with Julian. But seeing his handwriting brought a sudden, sharp pang of memory. Not of the bad times, not the cheating or the screaming, but of the very beginning. The Ethan who bought her a pretzel in the park. The Ethan who was scared of thunderstorms. The human being underneath the monster he had become. "I haven't opened it," Sophie admitted. "Do you want to?" Julian asked gently. "You don't have to. We can shred it right now. You owe him nothing. Not even your attention." Sophie ran her finger along the edge of the envelope. If I don't read it, I'll always wonder. It's the final variable in the equation, Julian. I need to solve for X, so I can close the book. Julian nodded slowly. He stood up and walked toward the balcony door. I'll give you a moment. I'll be right outside. He slid the glass door open and stepped out onto the terrace, giving her privacy, but remaining close enough to protect her if the words on the page tried to hurt her. Sophie took a deep breath. She picked up the letter opener, a heavy silver object that felt cold in her hand, and slit the envelope. She unfolded the paper. It was cheap, lined notebook paper, the kind bought at a dollar store. Sophie, I don't know if this address will even reach you. I imagine you have people who filter out trash like me. But on the off chance you are reading this, don't worry. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for a job. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing this because today, while I was on my break, I saw a magazine in the break room trash. It had your face on it. You were named CEO of the Year. I sat there in my safety vest, smelling like diesel fumes, and I cried. Not because I was jealous, but because you looked happy. You were right about everything, Sophie. Do you remember what you told me the night of the gala? You said I didn't leave you because I outgrew you, but because I was terrified that you were the only reason I succeeded. God, you were so right. I spent 8 years in a cell thinking about that. I realized that I never actually built anything. I just took. I took your time, your energy, your ideas, and your love. I hollowed you out to fill myself up, and when you were empty, I threw you away. I am working at a warehouse now. It's hard work. My back hurts every day. I make $16 an hour, and honestly, it's the first honest money I've ever earned. I go home to a quiet room, and I think about the life we had. The Sunday mornings, the coffee, the way you used to fix my tie. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was chasing a reflection in a mirror. I wanted to be a king. Well, I'm not a king. I'm just a man who made a terrible mistake. I hope Julian treats you like the treasure you are. I hope he listens to you. I hope he never makes you feel small. Be happy, Sophie. You won. And I'm finally glad that you did. Ethan Tsweti read the letter twice. The first time, she read it with her guard up, expecting a trap, a manipulation, a hidden barb. The second time, she read it with her heart. She looked at the handwriting. It was messy. There were ink smudges where his hand had rested too long on the page. It wasn't the bold, slashing signature of the executive VP. It was the handwriting of a tired, broken man. A single tear escaped her eye and tracked down her cheek. She didn't cry for the loss of the marriage. That had been dead for a long time. She cried for the tragedy of it all, the waste. Ethan had all the potential in the world, but he had let his ego rot him from the inside out. He had to lose everything to find his humanity. It was a heavy price to pay for a soul. Sophie wiped her face and stood up. She walked to the glass doors and slid them open. The wind off the Hudson was brisk, carrying the scent of salt and city grit. Julian turned from the railing. He saw the paper in her hand. He didn't ask what it said. He just looked at her face. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am," Sophie said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. The knot of bitterness that she had carried deep in her gut, the tiny part of her that still wanted to see Ethan suffer, unraveled. "He's sorry," Sophie said softly. "He's really sorry." "Does it change anything?" Julian asked. "No," Sophie said firmly. "It doesn't change the past. He still did what he did. He still broke us. But it changes how I carry it. She walked to the edge of the balcony, 40 stories above the street. Below, the yellow taxis looked like toys, and the people were mere specks scurrying through the canyons of steel and glass. Somewhere down there, in the grit and the noise, was Ethan. He was living his life, and she was living hers. The cords that had bound them together, anger, resentment, debt, were finally severed. "I don't need to hate him anymore," Sophie said. "Hating him is just another way of holding on to him." She held the letter out over the railing. The paper fluttered violently in the updraft, fighting against her grip. "You're letting it go?" Julian asked. "I'm letting him go," Sophie corrected. She opened her fingers. The wind snatched the letter instantly. It didn't float gently. It was ripped away, spiraling rapidly into the void, tumbling end over end toward the grey water of the river. It danced for a moment against the backdrop of the skyscrapers, a white flag of surrender, before disappearing into the urban abyss. Sophie watched until it was gone. She felt lighter. The air in her lungs felt cleaner. She turned back to Julian. The sun was setting now, casting long, golden shadows across the balcony. It illuminated the silver in Julian's hair and the kindness in his eyes. This was her reality. This was her victory. Not the money, not the title, not the revenge. This. "Take me home, Julian," she said, reaching for his hand. "We are home, Sophie." He smiled, interlacing his fingers with hers. They turned and walked back into the warmth of the office, the glass door sliding shut behind them with a definitive click, sealing out the cold, the wind, and the ghosts of the past forever. And that is the end of the line for Ethan and Sophie. It's a story that reminds us that the universe has a very specific way of balancing the books. Ethan spent his life trying to manipulate the numbers, trying to cheat the system, and in the end, the math caught up with him. He learned that you can't build a castle on a foundation of betrayal. Sophie's journey proves that the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting or stooping to their level. The best revenge is simply ascending. It's becoming so successful, so happy and so complete that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. I want to know what you would have done in Sophie's shoes. When that letter arrived, would you have read it? Would you have thrown it away? Or would you have sent a reply? It's a tough question. Let me know your honest answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us create more long-form dramas like this one. Share this video with a friend who needs to be reminded of their own worth, and make sure you are subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss our next saga. Remember, be careful who you step on while you're climbing up, because you might meet them on your way back down. Thanks for watching.